Good morning, everyone. We are continuing with our Ananda way of life based on the guidelines for members of the Ananda Sevaka order. So let's begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dear friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to all. Help us to feel your living presence, your guiding spirit, your wisdom, your love, so that we may live always in constant attunement with the divine will. We are your children. Guide us and bless us. Om. Peace. Amen. Give us a moment here. We need to do a little tech improvement. As you can see from the backdrop, we're not in our, we're out of our usual habitat. We're up at Ananda Village because of Spiritual Renewal Week this week, which if you aren't watching online, I highly encourage you to do so. 2 morning classes so far have been 5-star, and you'll really like them. So we are now on Article 5, which is personal habits. And the defining sentence in this one page is Ananda members should sift mentally through their personal habits and not continue unthinkingly in old patterns of behavior merely because of some prior momentum that has been established in their lives. Now we've talked about clothing, and now we're going to talk about reading material, but mostly we're going to talk about study material. The phrase, though, is not to continue unthinkingly merely because of some prior momentum. And I've touched that from many different angles. I spent a whole session just talking about that one long sentence. But we also have to realize that life is directional and life is progressive. And we have to develop to a certain point before we are capable of becoming serious on the spiritual path. And then we become a truth seeker, then we explore lots of different teachings. Then, if it is our karma, we get to the point where the path that really belongs to us comes to us. And we are able, at a certain point, to recognize that, to commit to it, and then to have the strength of will to hold to that commitment and have it not just be something that sort of comes and goes. All of this takes a lot of incarnations, or even progressive in one incarnation. It just depends on karmic factors that are that I can't generalize about, because each of us has our own path. So the reason I'm mentioning it for what I'm about to talk about is that often that which has really been our friend and really served us well now needs to be put aside because we're on to the next chapter. And our affection for it, our respect for it, our sense that, but this really helped me, is all true. It's just, it has helped me to come to this next step. And now that I'm at this next step, what was perfectly appropriate and beneficial now ceases to be so beneficial. And that's part of what we have to figure out. And this is actually the entire dilemma that's described in the Bhagavad Gita. Because Arjuna is caught in this reality where the 5 Pandava brothers are pitted against their own cousins. And the cousins and the brothers were raised together. They have a common grandfather. They were trained for their lives as royals by the same mentors. They've had boyhood adventures together, some positive, some tempestuous, as boyhood adventures can be. But nonetheless, it's the whole trajectory of Arjuna's life. And when you know the whole Mahabharata, of which the Gita is only one chapter, the Mahabharata is the incredible epic tale that brings the cousins and the brothers to the battlefield where it's going to be a fight to the death, and Krishna is driving Arjuna's chariot, and this is the moment when Arjuna has to pick up his weapon and he has to ruthlessly slay his cousins. I mean, there's many allegorical aspects to it, but it was also literally that physical. That's what he had to do. He had to pick up a weapon, he had to kill his cousins. He had to kill his boyhood associates. He had to kill those childhood mentors who were now siding with the cousins. It was a very, very difficult situation that Arjuna found himself in, and he pulled back from it. And in the story of the Mahabharata, you have all this long, agonizing tale of how Yudhishthira, the eldest of the Pandava brothers, did everything possible to compromise and avoid this final confrontation, but there was no choice. And still, after all of that just adds poignancy to Arjuna's sudden waffling, is that of course you have to do this. Everything dictates that you have to do it, but he doesn't want to. And I'm going to paraphrase the Gita, but Krishna says something to Arjuna like, you're using words that sound clever and wise just to cover your own cowardice. That's what he says. And Arjuna's the great hero, and Krishna's calling him a coward. And he thinks he's being, really broad-minded and loving and kind. Better to give up the kingdom than to do this terrible deed of slaying those who have been my own. Now that's the drama, which is, it's so magnificent. But the images, what they really represent, is that which has served us and been our friends all the way up until now. There comes a point on the spiritual path where you have to let it go. And you have to slay it. You have to just repudiate it from your life. You have to purge it from your consciousness. But it's been my friend. We've had such good times together. But not anymore, because it simply doesn't suit you now. Now you have a different destiny, and the actual words are, now you've grown beyond this. And it's very poignant. It often means that we have to leave physical places. We often have to give up friendships or relationships that were very important to us. We have to give up the comfort of the familial warmth. In an earlier session when I was talking about that very sentence, I was talking about a woman friend of mine who was defending really inappropriate behavior on the basis of, this is the way I was raised. Well, it's comfortable to just continue in the way you were raised. You have all that precedent around you and all that comfort, and this is the way we do it. That's quite different than having to not continue with the habitual momentum, but stop and really choose. And this is why so many people don't get on the spiritual path. It's just too hard. But that's what this is about. Now, the reason I'm going to, when I now read this section, you'll understand what I'm talking about here. First of all, Swami only talks about books. I found this interesting because this was written in the early 80s. There was no such thing as Netflix or all the different ways that you can bring into your world all these forces of entertainment and so on that are often not at all harmonious with our spiritual aspiration. So I'm going to, he talks about books only because that's all there was, but the principles involved. There's one sentence first. Members' reading material should exclude anything that is grossly sensual or violent. It should include as much as possible books that are spiritual or instructive or in some way expansive to that consciousness. So, this is fairly self-evident. And if you do the slightest bit of experimentation, it becomes pretty obvious. If we indulge whatever these realities are, and nowadays, especially when you start going to movies, it's hard to find. I mean, the decency level has really lowered itself, and the vividness of violence and sensuality, and the degree to which we've become inured to it. We don't even realize sometimes what's really being presented in front of us. A friend of mine, whose name began with the K, he was very, very sensitive to violence, to sadness, to anything like that. And so we had actually the K rating. If a movie was K rated, well, basically I, who was only slightly less sensitive than he, I knew that I could watch it. He couldn't watch Bambi because it was just too sad when Bambi's mother died. So I could watch Bambi. That was sort of the crossover line. Although I became increasingly sensitive to how sad it was when the mother died. And it was hard for me to be able to do it. But things that just unduly upset us. Swamiji liked to read for relaxation. He liked to read fiction for relaxation, especially earlier in his life. Toward the end of his life, he stopped. But so often when he was traveling, he would go into the bookstore of the airport and just look for some light novels that he could read and just to relax his mind while he was traveling. But he always would read the last few pages of the book before he would decide, because he always wanted to make sure there was a happy ending. Because if the book didn't have a happy ending, he said, there's too much sorrow in my life, too much sorrow in my real life. He said, I don't want to read fiction that ends sadly. I said, well, doesn't that spoil the adventure of the book for you? He said, no. He said, I find it interesting to see how the author is going to get us to that point. And I never have done that myself, but recently I was reading, there's a series by a British writer named Jacqueline Winspear, and it's Maisie Dobbs. She's the main character, and I recently learned there's now 16 Maisie Dobbs books, and I'd only read to 12, and I totally enjoyed them. Maisie Dobbs has suffered a lot in her life. I mean, she's a fictional character, but she's a real person to me. And the books are very well done. It's very complex, and she has suffered a lot in her life. So I'm reading book number 14, and it looks like something good may happen to Maisie. And I found myself so tense about whether or not one more time she was going to be disappointed that I had to do what Swami did, and I had to look at the last page. And there was just a few key words there that told me she was going to be happy this time and not disappointed, and then I relaxed and I finished reading the book. I mean, it's a small thing, but I don't need any more sadness in my life either. I just don't. There's been plenty, and there's plenty that's brought to me by others, and I don't mind, but I'm not going to pick up a fiction book also. What to speak of sensual or violent, where you have to worry. Where, I was watching a Netflix series, which we all do. I was enjoying it, but then the people were too mean. I just I don't need to spend time with these mean people. I wouldn't spend any time with them if they were in my house. I would never invite them to dinner. Why would I sit here and watch them now? So think about these things, because it all comes back to us. And the subconscious mind can't tell the difference really between fiction and real life. It just has the experience. I actually found, before I stopped what I was watching, I actually found that I found myself just slightly worried about something. And then I realized I was worried about the fictional characters in the movie. I thought, no, this is not wholesome. I'm not going to do this. So we have to be creative. We have to put out a little energy to figure out how to make it work. Now, here's the rest of this, and this is the bigger part of it. Members should not read even spiritual books indiscriminately, but try to confine themselves more to books that are in tune with the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. For even among spiritual teachings, outward contradictions exist and may produce confusion. Certain great masters, for example, have taught their disciples only to meditate. Others have placed emphasis on living far removed from worldly influences. Still others have prescribed for their followers a regimen of work, work, work. Each spoke to a particular need in his disciples and in the age and in the environment in which they all lived. The consciousness of all realized souls is the same, but their message is tailored to the needs of their disciples, to the yuga in which they incarnate, to the culture in which they incarnate, to the specific circumstance that may have prompted that incarnation in order to create a movement of energy that the avatar was born to create. So it's very easy when you read this avatar's, even when you say, this is a self-realized master, you read this avatar's teaching to his disciples, and it's very different from this avatar's teaching to his disciples. And there's an inclination at the beginning that will cherry pick. I'll take a little of this and I'll take a little of that, and I like what this one says and I like what that one says. I'm going to deal with that question in just a moment. And up to a certain point, you see, that serves us really well. It's like we need to know what our choices are so that we make an informed decision about how we're going to commit ourselves. I mean, sometimes it happens because of past karma that we just meet this path and that's it. When Swami Kriyananda read Autobiography of a Yogi, he'd never heard of many of the concepts that Master presented, but he had an absolute recognition of Master based on many past lives, which of course it all became evident later on as time passed. But he didn't need in this life, but he'd been a very serious truth seeker up until that point. And he had investigated many different ways of finding truth, and he thought very deeply, and he'd had some very deep experiences. So he was not naive, but he had the power at that point to know. Most people, it doesn't happen that way. In fact, when Swami was polishing the first part of his autobiography, The Path, the New Path, as he called the revised book, The New Path, he talks about just finding autobiography, knowing Master was his destiny, leaving everything behind, and going and becoming a disciple. Master was still in the body at that time. I was working with Swami, Kalyani and I were with Swami working on this editing, and I said to him, Swamiji, by that point, this would have been the late 70s, I had been working with the people coming to our meditation retreat, so I had some experience, not a great deal, but some experience with how people came to our path. I said, Swamiji, almost no one has that kind of instant recognition. It grows on them very slowly. They often waffle between one choice or another. They have false starts. It gradually becomes clear to them. People are going to think that if they don't have that kind of instant recognition, that this isn't their path. Or the other pitfall of that example is that you may be somewhere where some huge emotional explosion happens. Or worse, you may be with someone who imposes their will on you. I'm talking about spiritual teachers. And you have an experience out of your normal range, and you decide that must mean that this is my path. And I've also seen that happen. I had a very odd experience with this teacher who's off the planet now. He was from India. Many different spiritual teachers would visit Ananda, and actually some of them harvested disciples from Ananda that sometimes worked out well, but often didn't. But there was one such man who was harvesting, who had a tremendous amount of spiritual power. And Swami Kriyananda was out of the country when we hosted this man. And actually after this experience, Swami did not invite other teachers to come to Ananda when he wasn't there, because we needed his presence to keep the situation balanced. But I'm sitting here in a satsang with this man whom he was powerful. And he started talking about his experiences in the Himalayas with different extraordinary saints and beings that he met up there. This was all his true experience. And I had my eyes closed and I was just listening and wildly enjoying the whole adventure. All of a sudden, I could see what he was describing. And it wasn't merely that I was using my imagination to think what it might be. I could see it. I was there in the place where he was. I could see the rocks. I was sort of standing by these rocks. I could see what he was talking about. And it was like, cool. Nothing like this had ever happened to me before. My life I don't have those kinds of experiences. And I just was like mesmerized. And then I just had this realization, this man has invaded my mind. He's imposing this vision on me. He had the power to do it. And I said, I have not invited him to invade my mind. You see, it's not appropriate for the master to invade your mind unless you invite him. That's why we don't change very much, is because we don't invite him. We have to be, that's why John said, to all who received him, to them gave he the power. It wasn't that Christ couldn't give that power to everyone, but he could only, by the divine laws, give it to those who open themselves consciously by an act of cooperation. This man had imposed his vision on me. And in that moment, I basically said, I don't want you in my mind. Zap, closed up just like that. But and talking to Swami about it later, I said for some reason that, I knew what was going on. But several people had experiences with this man and then left. Because there's just a lot going on, it's, and here's where I have to finish what I was saying. For the first year especially, Swami says, those in training should confine their leisure reading as much as possible to the writings of Yogananda, Kriyananda, and others in the self-realization Ananda line. Paramhansa Yogananda brought to us, who live at Ananda, the teachings we have elected to follow, elected, our decision. Let us then be loyal to the choice we have made. Now, this is the other point I want to say it, because many people object to this. I like this book, I laugh because people will say, oh, I found this wonderful book, it's just like Master's teachings. And I'll say, if it's just like Master's teachings, why don't you just read Master's teachings? And God knows I'm not narrow-minded and I'm not sectarian. I don't have anything against the plethora of resources we have that are available. But especially at the beginning, until one is deeply grounded, for this reason, information is not what transforms us. What transforms us is the grace of the Guru. And the grace of the Guru, yes, we have to learn and practice the Guru's teachings, but we learn and practice the Guru's teachings because it aligns our consciousness with that ray of grace, with that vibration. It aligns it in two ways. It aligns it because we are absorbing their consciousness through their words, and nowadays through their voices, through their faces, through their photographs. We have so many resources where we can become familiar on ever deeper levels with what this vibration is. It's attunement that transforms us, not information. And attunement is very, very subtle. So this teacher may have a great deal to offer. This one may be fascinating. This one may have just a marvelous aspect in this way or the other. But Swami has done everything he can to try to help us to understand what it is that we're receiving. He uses the word array of grace. He also uses the word vibration. This is a particular vibration. And we are made of vibration. We're sound, we're Om. And I always think of this in terms of I'm a mediocre singer. I can sometimes, get the melody or the alto part, which I try to sing. And fortunately, I have a better ear than I have a voice. So I can tell when my voice is out of tune with someone who really is right on that. And I can sing along slightly out of tune, but there's always it never quite merges. But when I can be close enough to someone strong who sings the right note in my ear, and I can match it with my voice, which I can usually do if I work at it a little bit, something completely other happens. Because now I'm on the right vibration, and the right vibration is flowing through us. Now, a certain amount of what we do on the spiritual path, at the beginning, we just have to do it because those that we have come to trust, see, there's many stages in this. I've come to trust that your instruction to me is valid. And when we get to the end of this book and we talk about the vows that you can take, there has to be a point where I trust that this line of teaching is the right one for me, and if I cooperate with it, it will bring me to where I want to be. But that doesn't mean I understand in the way that I understood things before I was on this path. Before I have a line of teaching, a master, a community, spiritual friends who I'm trying to emulate and be in harmony with, I had to make up my own mind because nothing around me matched what I was trying to achieve. That was actually my growing concern as I grew up, which is I knew there was a deeper truth to life. I knew it existed. I presumed that the grown-ups around me also knew it. And they were just like waiting till I got a little older and then they would tell me. But as I got a little older, I began to realize they didn't know. That they were just rolling along with life as it presented it to themselves, and they did not have what I later discovered, the thread of Sanatana Dharma that I was born to live by. So I had to make up my own mind. I had to be very independent and very strong and just like, no, this is what I think is true. I remember telling my father I was never going to join the world that he was part of. And I was too young to be kind because, of course, it was the world that he entered in order to raise his children. And so I was not appropriate in my response. But I was right. I'm not going to enter that world. I didn't know what world I was going to enter, but I knew I wasn't going to enter that one. And you have to be like that. But if you may remember, or you can go back to the very beginning, life in a community cannot also be a powerful affirmation of independence. But you're not sacrificing the power of your self-determination. We have made a conscious choice that my self-determination tells me then I need to cooperate with this line of teaching. So when the Master says to us, and it's not just Kriyananda in this booklet, it was Yogananda himself, concentrate on this line of teaching and those spiritual teachings that are in tune with it. Now that's a little subtle to determine, but don't just continue to go here, there, and everywhere. The policy that I've followed, because I like to read for relaxation. How I relax is by reading. I love to read books about saints. But whenever the book about saints becomes a discussion of that saint's teaching, I tend to skip those parts. And I don't skip them because they're awful, like skipping over the violent part of the movie. It's not like that. It's like I have a teaching. But I'm inspired by anybody who has the courage to live for God. So if you're a missionary in some poor hovel somewhere in some, isolated part of the world, and you have the courage to do that. I was deeply inspired reading about a Christian missionary in China who felt that he had to save everyone from going to hell, which by telling them about Jesus Christ, which I don't accept that part of it, but he was dedicated. And his example of absolute dedication actually really helped me. But I didn't pay any attention to his teaching. And I don't do that like all the time. But, we find a line. But the basic principle is what I want is attunement. And I'll tell one more story in this. I read the visions of Anne Catherine Emmerich. She was a German saint in the 1800s, and she had all these visions of Jesus, which I found very interesting. And some of them have influenced my ability to understand the life of Jesus. Those were interesting books. I gave a set of those books to Swamiji, but he wasn't inspired by them. They accidentally ended up in his office after Swami died. And I saw them in there, and I took them out. I said, this is misleading because Swami did not read these books. I gave these books to him, but he didn't want to read them. And I was a little puzzled by that. And this is my explanation. This is the only thing I can say. I took those books into seclusion with me once because I took a seclusion before Easter or something like that, and I thought it would be helpful. When I was in seclusion and the vibration was much clearer, I couldn't read the books. They didn't uplift me. Isn't that interesting? I can't say any more about it. But it was so clear to me that these books were entertaining, but they didn't put me in tune. And I could even feel that they put me a little out of tune. I don't know why. But that obviously then is what Swami felt when he was reading them. And nonetheless, I think they were true. And nonetheless, the picture of Jesus was fascinating to me. But this is what we have to train ourselves to know. What helps me be more in tune with the path that I've chosen? And this particular series is the Ananda way of life for those who want it. If this doesn't make sense to you, I'm not telling you that you can't just be eclectic and have a great time. I'm just saying, if you've made this choice, and this choice, and this choice, and this choice, then this is also something you have to take very seriously. Paramhansa Yogananda brought to us, who live at Ananda, the teachings we have elected to follow. Let us then be loyal to the choices we have made. He doesn't even say be loyal to the Guru. He says be loyal to ourselves. I have made this decision. I know why I've made it. Let me commit myself to it and follow it. God bless you, my friend.